Hello everyone, this is the Barebow Archery Podcast. I'm your host Glenn Pringle, and we've got a different style of show this week and next. We hope you like it. Following on from our last podcast with Dwight Dorsey, we're still on the theme of shot control and target panic. Now, before some of you groan and start to switch off, it's not all doom and gloom. Nearly everyone who listens to traditional, barebow or hunting podcast will have heard of the name Joel Turner. Joel teaches controlled process shooting, and you can look him up on his ShotIQ website. Just a little bit of news before we go into the podcast itself. In the US, they had indoor nationals all across the USA at different sites. The top 8 were John Denner III, Grayson Partlow, Jarrett Kellen, Rich Stonebreaker, Lee Wilkins, John Winker, Paul Donahue and Jason Lindner. Top women in that event were Fawn Gerard, Yao Yu, Kay Earls, Chrissy Lines, Jennifer Stoner, Susan Snyder, Vijaya Gotapu and Ruth Delzell. In the Rimini Italian Indoors, which you can find on YouTube, it's Eleonora Meloni. She took first in the women's barebow. Mauro Marcelli took first in the men's barebow. A reminder again, this is a 2-part episode with Joel Turner of ShotIQ. We're exploring target panic, Joel shooting at Vegas and what he saw with other archers at Vegas, and we have some listener questions to get through. So sit back and enjoy part 1 of this Joel Turner special. For anyone that doesn't know you, can you kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I started shooting a bow when I was 7 years old, and I thought I was really good at it. But I was, by the age of 8, I was engulfed fully into target panic, as most people are, and that has followed me throughout my whole shooting career, as it is with anybody. And so I got tired of failure. So I started to research things and why things happen and how do we actually consciously override things. So that's been my life quest, has been to get people in control of their shot. And luckily I have figured some things out that are very thought-provoking and interesting. So that's kind of where all this is coming from.
And what was your turning point? Why did you kind of delve into it a bit further? What exactly was your turning point?
Well, all through, when I was growing up, I started bow hunting at the age of 14, and I just could not keep it together when I was shooting at critters. And I really couldn't keep it together on targets either at that point. But it was so bad that one of my buddies in high school, we were both so horribly into target panic that I would go to his house before school, we would go to his house, and we would both have to, there was a giant log pile next to the target, and we would both have to draw back and aim at the log pile just to get the full draw. And then we would both have to swing our bows over and drive by shoot the target. And it just, I've come into a target from every direction you can imagine. I used to have to hold 5 or 6 feet over a target, dump my bow, let the string go all at the same time. And once I got a bit older and I got more and more hunting opportunities where my shooting was just, I didn't do that bad. I was still winning tournaments and such, but it wasn't good enough. And then I became a law enforcement officer, and the options of missing were no longer there. So that's when I really started to have to figure this stuff out. I figured out the whole control process shooting program in firearms before archery.
Okay.
And I took all the research that I'd done in that realm and then took it to my archery shot and then figured out it's really the same science. So it's it's interesting stuff for sure on how your mind works and works against you in shooting.
Would this be some kind of mechanism where you kind of effectively self-sabotage?
Well, I mean, the core problem in shooting that instructors, coaches, and shooters have to understand is that your mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. And everybody's trying to get this surprise break with a firearms trigger or a surprise release on the archery shot. But if left to its own devices, the subconscious will not allow that to happen. We are pre-programmed. I mean, everybody's born with target panic. Everybody's born with an aversion to impact to the body. So it's not a disease. It's not something that you catch by talking about or anything like that. We're all born with it. If you are pushed over, you're going to try to catch yourself. That is a pre-impact movement, a pre-ignition movement. That's what happens. So all of the archery and all of the shooting is based on how do we get around these pre-ignition movements or pre-impact movements. And, you know, a form coach will teach form and, you know, why do we need to be in this alignment that we talk about? Why do we need to do this or that? Why do we hold the bow the way that we do? And those are all ways to limit the range of motion of pre-ignition movements. When you really boil it down to the nth degree, that's why a coach will teach you certain form, only to limit the range of motion of your pre-ignition movements. But the problem is that most coaches don't necessarily understand that, and they still allow the pre-ignition movement to completely blow the shot apart at the end. And, you know, like with a collapse is nothing more than a pre-ignition movement. A pluck is nothing more than a pre-ignition movement. So a lot of times we're trying to fix things that can't actually be fixed. You have to fix the pre-release motions or the setup to the shot or all those things. So, I mean, it's not that your mind's sabotaging you. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's keeping you safe. So once you realize that, then you'll start to think a bit differently about how you approach a shot.
Okay. One of the listeners to the podcast, Adam Strachan-Stevens, he says, just going back to that about kind of being coached, effectively being coached to kind of minimize the movements, but not actually kind of sort out the actual core problem. He's saying, is there a way of training beginners so that they don't develop target panic later in their archery career?
Right. So when you're teaching somebody new, you know, when we all enter into archery in the cognitive stage of learning, we enter into any movement training in the cognitive stage of learning, where we've broken it down into steps, and it's still fairly choppy. It's not efficient. And we talk ourselves through specific things. Those steps that we have when we learn a movement, those steps are made of words, right? So the self-talk in the cognitive stage of learning is of utmost importance, but it's not what your mind wants to do. It wants to push past that, because when you learn a movement, like let's say throwing a baseball, so you learn how to grip the ball and you learn how to cock your arm back and the forward motion, all those things. And if you stay in the cognitive stage of learning for that movement, the movement never gets efficient. It never gets smooth like you want it to, right? And the problem is in learning shooting, we treat it the same way as any other movement. So you might learn all these things, and your instructor might tell you to add some back tension until you let the string go or whatever. Well, that adding back tension, you're able to do it the first few times you shoot. You actually see the tip of that arrow moving rearward as you are moving that shoulder, you know, behind you in the proper direction. But then that movement becomes more and more and more efficient. And then the movement equals the explosion of the bow going off, so your mind doesn't let you do that anymore. That's why archers are good for the first few months, and then as soon as they start into the efficiency, as soon as they push past the cognitive stage of learning, that's when they start into target panic. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse. It doesn't get better with time, it just gets more efficient. So when I train new people to shoot, I for sure put them on some type of mechanoreceptive trigger. It might be a clicker, it might be a solid clicker, it might be a grip sear, who knows. I'm just eliminating completely the pre-ignition movements. And so now their movement that I'm teaching them, their shot activation movement, whatever movement it is that gets them to their trigger, that it now has a goal to it, right? The goal is tripping the trigger. So, and then once the trigger is tripped, the shooter doesn't have to do anything other than that, because the mechanoreceptors in your skin cells are sending the signal instead of your subconscious sending the signal. Anytime you let your subconscious tell itself when to release, it's always going to link pre-ignition movements to that release motor program. That's not my opinion. That's just how it works. That's the science of it, right? So I teach people to separate the shot, from the get-go. There's drawback and aim, get it done. Watch it to keep it, using your visual proprioception to aim, just watching the system like a picture, and then switching your concentration from that first job to the second job, which is putting the concentration into the shot activation movement. So when you teach somebody this way, and that's how they approach the shot, every shot, and what you're essentially doing is you're keeping them in the cognitive stage of learning. And that's why shooting controlled shots is so unnatural, because you're keeping yourself out of efficiency, which is unlike any other movement that you would ever learn. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes good sense. I've got another question just from one of the listeners. It's from Alex Melnick over there in Canada. Mm-hmm. And he says, people say, I don't have target panic. Do you believe them? Are they correct? Or do you believe that this is a part of the human condition? Everyone has it, and some just control it better than others. Because there are some people that can shoot scores absolutely through the moon, but some people like that, they kind of rise up and they hit a kind of peak of form, and then they kind of disappear again. And others are around for years and years and years. So either they're using a triggered shot, or they're doing something differently. I mean, are there people that don't get this?
Everybody is affected by, it's just your central nervous system, right? It's not that you were born with no central nervous system. There's no born natural shooters, but there are born natural decision makers, right? Those people that are on the line all the time and shooting well for years at a time. Like you said, you've seen those that rise and fall all the time. But those people that are very consistent, you will notice that they're of a very specific personality. They're very calm people. That's a personality trait, right? So those people are also good decision makers. So they're going to fail just like the rest of people, but they become more determined, and they put that determination into specific movements in their shot. These people aren't there at the top all the time because they're good at aiming. That's not why they're there. They're not just, better aimers than everybody else. They're better decision makers. All of the top shooters you will see, they all separate their shot somehow, right? Like Demmer blinks, whether he'll tell you that or not. When you see Demmer get to full draw and aim, he blinks, big blinks, right? And those blinks are a way that his mind is separating the shot. He never lets it go before he blinks, right? If you look at John Dillinger, he bounces the knock on his nose 3 times before he lets it go, every single time. Those are ways that these folks are separating the shot into 2 completely different jobs. And those are the people that stay at the top. If you have, like, if you're shooting phenomenal one day, but you don't know how you're doing it, you are destined to fail because you have no way to repeat it. Your subconscious doesn't even want you to shoot the bow ever. It doesn't want to know when this thing's going to release all this energy at one time. So those are the systems that you're fighting. Those that are, like me, growing up as a young man, I had no clue what decisions were required to actually override my central nervous system. Now I know exactly what those decisions are. I know exactly when to make them in the shot, and I know how to scientifically carry them out. So that's why, my scores are very consistent. I don't have good days and bad days. I shoot one controlled arrow at a time, no matter what. And when you talk to these people that are at the top, they're the same way. I mean, you're talking to Martin Otteson the other day. He has a very specific sequence that he follows no matter what. That's why he's at the top and stays at the top. I talked with Martin, I think it was back in 2014. I gave him the tab sear information. And evidently, he in the podcast, he said that there are others that had done that. I had no idea that there are others that had done that in the 90s. I wish I'd have known about it then, but
yeah.
He's trying to figure stuff out, and Martin and I talked on the phone at length, and then I sent him some pieces for some tab sear material, and then he used to shoot a tab sear, and you could watch him do it. I mean, why was he at full draw so much longer than all these other people? But when you could see a view from the back, you could see his thumb come down on the edge of that tab and work that tab sear. That's what I'm watching, and most people are just watching the target or whatever. Yeah,
I mean, Martin kind of said about I don't want to misquote him, but he was talking about essentially just shooting with hope, or he called it no plan shooting.
Right.
Does that essentially, will it always lead to target panic?
It will, absolutely. I mean, people, some people say that, I'm not worth a darn on targets, but when I'm bow hunting, in a higher stress situation, I'm deadly. Well, that's only because in their bow hunting shot, they're making decisions that they're not making. They're using determination that they're not using in the practice. I just came back from Vegas, and the main question was, how do I take what I do in practice to the line? I mean, I had pros asking me this. I had all kinds of people asking me this. And the answer is very simple. People are trying to practice with one physiological condition, right? When they're in practice, their heart's not beating like crazy, and their palms aren't sweating, and their respiration is fairly normal, and all these things. But when you get on the line and it's for time and for score, their physiological changes that happen completely destroy their thought process, because all they've ever practiced is the physicality of the shot. You cannot take the same body with you to the line. It's impossible. You can't control the physiological changes that happen. But you can take the same mind with you. You can take the blueprint for your controlled shot with you. And that's how you take what you do in practice and you take that to the line. So, a lot of people that are on that practice range in Vegas are in there practicing their own failure. And it's sad to watch, because people are just slinging arrow after arrow after arrow. But, when you go to these major competitions, as I'm sure you see, most barebow shooters are not aiming at the spot. They're off of it, and they raise or lower their bow to the spot. And as soon as they see some semblance of the right sight picture, that is the stimulus for their release motor program.
Yeah.
Notice that?
Yeah, I mean, I've recently started reading around on kind of shooting problems. I was reading a book by Jay Kidwell with basically saying, for a lot of people, their kind of target panic manifests itself as in they've practiced so much at trying to stick something on a yellow dot on a target or on a on a marked kill zone on a 3D target, and as soon as their mind sees that, the shortcut's there, and it just thinks, let go. You're on target, and you've programmed yourself. And people try to practice their way out of target panic. So what they do is they practice more and more and more, and send themselves further and further down the kind of rabbit hole. Do you agree with that, or do you think that it's something else, another mechanism?
No, it's absolutely right. I mean, they're just, target panic, again, that core problem. Your mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. If it can time the explosion, it will time the explosion. So when you think of it that way, target panic comes in lots of different forms, but if you allow your sight picture to be the stimulus for your shot, it's just going to get more and more and more efficient, to the point where you're locked off of target. And as long as you're off the target, you're calm as a cucumber. But any movement toward the center or toward your gap or whatever it may be, whatever your perfect sight picture is, any movement toward that triggers the release motor program. So most of these people are only aiming for an actual microsecond, and they don't even see it. Because just like I was years ago, dropping my bow and letting the string go at the same time, they become linked motor programs. So that's why when you see all these great shooters that actually hold on the spot, they are definitely separating that shot between two completely different things. Their aim does not mean release. Their aim happens. There's a little storm that happens, right? When you're on the spot, as soon as you get on the spot, your mind wants to let it go. It's intuitive you're on the spot. Why are we not shooting, right?
Yeah.
So you put your point, like let's say you're lollipopping the yellow on an indoor target, right? So you need to get your point at the bottom of that. So you get your point to the base of that yellow. That's not time to shoot. That's time to decide. It's time to separate, right, from that. So, but most people, when they get to that spot, it's totally intuitive to let it go. And then pretty soon they don't quite get to the spot and they let it go. And they don't even, it is a rabbit hole that your mind loves you for. Because when it's held off the spot, the bow is not exploding. So it's okay with doing that. It's just like when you know you're not going to shoot the shot, you can aim any way and be so rock steady and all those things. But if you know you're going to shoot it, or you might shoot it, that's when all that stuff comes in. That's why blank bail shooting there's no transfer between blank bail shooting and actual aimed shooting. So because if it can aim, your mind is going to use that for a shot stimulus. So again, all the great shooters, you will see there is a separation, and you really have to watch them shoot. And you will see there is some type of separation. And, like I just mentioned a couple of names there.
Yeah.
And, I've watched those guys shoot hundreds of arrows. And it's very interesting to watch when you go back and watch some videos of those folks shooting, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some slow-mo of John Demmer III, and I see the blinks in the eyes. He says he's never been conscious of it. Do you think some of the kind of top shooters, they've just got that separation? It's not something that they've consciously decided to do, but it's there in their shot, kind of by a happy coincidence, and they do this, and that's what kind of keeps the target panic at bay. But for them, it wasn't a conscious decision to do it. Because I remember listening to John Dillinger on the Push, I think it was last week, and he says, the head bobble thing, I just wish I couldn't do it. But you're saying that's his kind of separation, and then he's got the next job to do, and that's separated all the other stuff, and then this is like, now it's time to shoot the shot.
Only if they're very determined people. Usually your mind's not going to just come up with a way to divert from explosions. At some point, the Johns had to figure out, that what they're doing wasn't working. I mean, I'm sure they haven't shot like that forever. They've dealt with target panic as well. right?
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that
definitely.
little head bobble thing, you never see Dillinger release an arrow before that happens.
Yeah.
That is creating pause in the shot, and he's filling it with a little head bob thing, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4, but it's never 0, right? It's never 0. I don't know that I've ever watched Demmer shoot a shot without blinking his eyes. It just creates pause in the shot, and that gets them through what we call the critical second. That second in time when you believe the aim is complete. It's not time to shoot then, it's time to decide. Right? For some people, it's time to blink your eyes. For some people, it's time to bobble your head. Whatever gets you through the critical second. That is the most important 1 second of your life in a shot, is just getting yourself over that hump. Because again, if you're like, let's say you're shooting a triggerless shot, you are, like I said before, you're going to see a storm. You're going to see this. You get your point where you want it, and then whoa, right? There's this. You have to get yourself through that 1 second in time, because if you just leave your mind to its own way, it's going to shoot the arrow then.
Yeah.
So that is one of the most important skills a shooter can ever have, is being able to just wait a second, right? Put your point where you want it. Wait a second. Just let the storm pass. And when you get yourself through that critical second, then you can start to be more cognitive in your shot. Maybe then you add a little back tension. Maybe then you start pressing through your sear, whatever it may be, right? Because if you get yourself through that critical second, you become intensely present in the process now instead of in the result. So you'll.
Are you saying that with that there can be people who shoot a triggerless shot, but they need to have a certain mindset and a certain level of determination, as well as that kind of method of separation, that they're the kind of only people that could really continue with a triggerless shot, but there's just some people that they're not good at making decisions ever, full stop.
Right. Right.
And they could never do that. They would have to use some form of a trigger.
That is a personality trait, right? I mean, all the top shooters that shoot triggerless are very determined, process-based thinkers. Now, maybe they were born that way. Maybe they made themselves that way. Like, if I shoot triggerless, I mean, it takes massive amounts of determination, but I can do it. But it takes massive amounts of determination. I don't have that extreme calmness that some of them possess. But you can do it still, as long as you understand what's coming, right? The storm is coming. The critical second is coming. It's so important to get yourself through that critical second. It has a profound effect, whether you're shooting triggerless or with a trigger. I mean, it is amazing just to get yourself through that 1 second in time. And that was the big, when you're asking about turning points, that was the biggest turning point for me, was when I finally did that in a shot. And I made myself intensely present. I didn't know what I was doing. I was shooting at a hog in Texas, and I had been just panicked out on numerous shots before that on this one hunt. And this one shot, I remember getting to full draw. The panic was the same. I was locked off target. All the bad things were happening, just as in all those other shots. But that one time, I was so angry that I said to myself at full draw, I am not doing this again. So I let that shot down. And when I drew my bow back again, I drew the bow back again with such determination that no matter what, I was going to get through my clicker. And I specifically remember all these decisions that I made in that shot. Before I drew my bow back that second time, I said, I'm going to shoot this shot perfectly or not at all. And that was a statement that was made with that determination, that was born in anger and all the frustration, everything that had happened before. And as I drew my bow back, I said, I'm going to do this right. I didn't realize it at the time, but now I call that the half draw moment. When you're actually knocking out autopilot once again, now you're in the shot process, you're drawing your bow back, and you need to become more present. You got to make a decision to do that. So say something to yourself as you draw your bow back. So I did that. I said, I'm going to do this right. I got to anchor. I got to the aim that I needed, and I had not done that at one time during this whole hunt. And I got the aim where I needed it, and I remember specifically saying, here I go. And that got me through that critical second when I wanted to shoot before getting through my clicker. I said, here I go. And then I started just absolutely screaming to myself in my head, keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. And finally I got through that clicker and I shot. Now, again, I didn't realize how I had controlled that shot until years later. So, but those decisions are so important, and it's the same decisions that these top shooters are making, whether they realize it or not. So, you know, I base everything in science and reality, and some people question the science, and that's fine. I mean, I had somebody the other day ask me, you know, I'd love to read the journals where you got your science. Well, I gave them the journals. And said, you may want to look up mechanoreceptors. You may want to look up open and closed loop control systems. So it's, I didn't make this stuff up. It's just how we do things. And I teach this all the time in firearms to snipers and law enforcement officials, because I've had to use it before in very high stress shooting situations in, you know, lethal force encounters. It's not something I make up. I interview people that are in high stress shooting events all the time, and the answers are always the same. There's really not any high stress, very successful shooter that I've interviewed yet that does it blank-minded.
You're listening to the Barebow Archery Podcast. Don't touch that dial.
I've stood and watched one guy in competition a few times and then seen comments on Facebook groups and stuff like that. And I'm kind of thinking, this is the definition of madness. You're doing something that you know doesn't work, and you're doing it over and over again and hoping somehow that the outcome is going to be different.
That's most archers.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, you know, people listening, if they're having a problem or they know someone who's having a problem with their shooting in terms of, you know, a premature release, or they can't let go of the string, or they can't get anywhere near the gold, or they can't, you know, they drive-by shooting where they're just going through the gold and it's a kind of a timed release. My kind of, you know, standpoint is, what are you thinking in your head? Like you were saying, blank-minded, but there are people who just kind of lift the bow up. I mean, I discussed this with Martin, the kind of no plan shooting, he called it, where it's just, they just, it's all like almost automatic. They lift the bow up, they pull the string back, they get to anchor, arrow's gone. And every shot's like that. But then I think there are other people where, you know, maybe there's a voice in their head going, oh, I hope this is going to be all right. I hope we don't miss again. And I'm kind of thinking, and people talk, you know, on the line, they say, oh, that was a terrible shot. I was kind of thinking, you know, that I had a bad shot last time. I'm like, you're just setting yourself up for failure. I'm not like a champion. I'm not an expert. But in my mind, if you constantly tell yourself over and over again that last arrow was no good, or that's just, I'm no good, and you're programming yourself for failure. So you saying the kind of the mantras that you use, they're there to kind of take away those negative thoughts and give you your brain something to do during that time?
The question of what are you thinking is the most important question you could ever ask yourself. And because it will tell you the world. Like if I do this all the time in my clinics. The first thing I do is I have people get up and shoot in front of me. Well, they shoot in front of the whole crowd, right? And so they shoot a couple arrows, and it's usually, they're usually fairly nervous, or I'm messing with them or whatever. It's very easy to destroy people's programs if they've shot in a fragile way. Like if they're just doing open loop stuff, if they're triggerless but don't know how to separate it, right? They're usually very easy to break. So, but what are you thinking is one of the most important questions, because if that person says, well, I'm just trying to hit the target, well, that's your no plan shooting. They don't know how they're doing that. Or if they're thinking about aiming, then I give them a lesson in visual proprioception and show them you have absolutely no physical control over your aim. It's controlled by a system called visual proprioception. If it moves, its next movement is always back to the center. Watch it like a picture. Get your gap, get your point where you need it, get your pin on the target, whatever it may be, and then you watch it like a picture. That's how you control it, simply through your eyes. But there's no concentration that makes it any better. There's no physical attributes that make it any better. You got to get your head away from the aim.
Yeah, can I just interject there? That's one of the most confusing things that I have ever seen in, especially kind of traditional stroke, single string, barebow shooting. Mm-hmm. I've got videos, I've got books where it's burn a hole in a spot on the target. You have to, grip that bow, and you have to force that bow to that spot, and you have to hold it there, and you have to. Essentially, it kind of sounds to me like the language that they use, and it's like you tense, your bow arms tense, you're gripping the riser, and you're like forcing this thing there. That doesn't kind of, again, in my mind, it doesn't work out as like kind of, this is a relaxed, you don't see anyone throwing, an Olympic javelin in the Olympics, kind of with their teeth gritted, an absolute grimaced face, stiffly kind of running along with a stiff arm where their white knuckles are gripping the javelin, or, anything, any kind of, gun shooter, or anyone doing any kind of fine, movements that require kind of fine motor skills. I don't see anyone doing that kind of thing. To me, that doesn't, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe, to me, that doesn't sound and seem like a good plan. That kind of burn a hole in it. You've got to keep that there. Is that them kind of misrepresenting some kind of way of, concentrating on the shot?
Yeah. So all the people that talk about that, and a lot of instinctive, quote unquote, instinctive shooters where they burn a hole in the target and it's their entire world, right? That means they're putting their subconscious and their conscious into the aim. And if you put your conscious mind in the aim, number one, it's not helping you at all. And number two, you've just left the entire shot to autopilot, the subconscious. If you leave the shot to the subconscious, it will brace you for recoil, no matter what. So, that separated shot that we teach is that, subconscious is phenomenal at aiming, but it's even better at bracing you for recoil. So you have to use your conscious mind to override it just for the shot activation movement. So, but back to those questions where, you ask people, what are you thinking about? And they'll tell you exactly what they're thinking about. And if it is anything other than the shot activation movement, when they get to that portion of the shot, then that they're leaving that shot to the subconscious. And again, it is working against you 100% of the time as far as accuracy goes. It's trying to just make you more efficient. So, when people are practicing, it's not about, your job is not to hit the target. Your job is not even to shoot the shot. Your job is to put all of your concentration into the shot activation movement when it comes to that portion of the shot. And then when you do that, you have to blueprint it. You got to know what you were thinking. You've got to know what you were saying to direct your concentration. You got to know that you could stop it. You have to be moving your shot activation movement at a rate that you can evaluate, a rate that you can stop anywhere within it. And then finally, what decisions did you make to get yourself into that process for that one shot? And when people have this blueprint and they use the shot to strengthen the blueprint to the point where they can answer these questions over and over and over again, it's so, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about my shot activation movement. What am I saying? I'm saying maybe keep pulling, maybe squeeze, maybe go, whatever it is, whatever words you're using to direct and trap your concentration. Could I have stopped it? Yeah, I was moving slow enough. I could feel it moving. I could have stopped it. What decisions did I make? Well, when I put tension on the string, I said, I'm going to shoot this shot with control no matter what, the original decision. As I drew my bow back, I said, I'm going to do this right, or whatever. Say something. And then when you get to the critical second, did you fill it with a decision of here I go? Right? Here I go gets people to jump out of airplanes, right? It's a phrase that gets people to move their body off of cliffs into water. It certainly can be used to get you through the critical second and cause you the impact of the bow going off. So when you have that blueprint, when you know what you're thinking, you know what you're saying, you know you could stop it, and you know what decisions you made, now that is what you can take to the line with you. Right?
Yeah.
And that, you're going to be dealing with physiological changes in your body. It's not even the same body that you practiced with.
Yeah, I know that. I know that feeling.
Right. It's got to be the same mind.
Right.
And so that's what I teach is how do you actually do that? It's not just intangible, you got to wish to the fairies or whatever. It's actual, this is how you need to do it. This is what's going to happen to your body.
Do you need to be motivated to use this system? Whether you use a triggered shot in terms of mechanical or mechanoreceptor trigger, or whether you use the kind of separation that the kind of Dillingers and the John Demmers, the Grayson Parlows use, do you need to be motivated to do it? Because it sounds like, again, it's not only people who can make decisions, but I think it's people who are dedicated and motivated. And I keep referring to this kind of typical club archer who maybe only shoots once or twice a week at the club, and then that's them. They don't ever pick the bow up until next week or the week after. Is this a system that's for everyone? And like, as I say, do you need to be motivated and do you need to stay on top of this?
I've never had a shooter not gain control of their shot after this program, because I'm not just teaching a system that, I hope this works out for you. I tell you right off the bat, this is not going to work for you. You have to work for it, and I know you've talked about this in your podcast before. I'm just showing you how to do the work. However, that determination or motivation that you talk about is the number one fail point of most people in shooting. Most people are not determined enough to make the decisions. When we talk about the fundamentals that I teach, the fundamentals of precision shooting, be that with a rifle or a bow or whatever, number one is determination. If you're not determined enough, you can't even step onto the path of shot control. So you have to find that. For the top barebow shooters or top shooters, I've been dealing with a lot of compound pros as well. They're very determined people, and some of it's personality. Some of them, they're born with it. Others have failed, and they've failed to the point of frustration, of anger, and they have this place they can remember that shot where they lost the world championship on that one shot, and that's when they said, I'm not doing that again. That determination, it's not something as an instructor I can teach you. I can only help you find it. And, there's some YouTube videos out there of me just absolutely berating people at the beginning of a clinic. And people are saying, oh, geez, Turner, he's such a prick or whatever, but I'm doing that to get their determination up, right? We call it the watch this factor. I've got some other names for it that I probably don't want to say on your podcast, right? But
yeah,
it is a thing, right? You have to get your determination up. And if it takes me berating you and ridiculing you to the point where you're like, F you, Turner, right? That's where I'm trying to get you to. Because if you say that, then you're going to go, F you, Turner, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to show you that I can do it. That's the determined person that I need to show up. That now you can step onto the path of shot control. Determination is the first one. The second one is decisions. Your determination leads to your decisions. I'm going to do it this way, no matter what. That's an original decision that should start every precision shot. And then when you make those decisions, you've got your original decision, your half draw moment, your critical second. Each one of those decisions, when you make it in your shot, is giving you more presence in the shot. Now you are present in the process. So presence is the third fundamental of precision shooting. You've got your determination, which leads to decisions. Decisions leads to presence, and presence leads to concentration, which is the fourth and final fundamental. Because if you're in the present, now you can talk, now you can think, now you can work yourself through that movement, whatever it may be. So all of these things start with that determination or motivation that you're talking about. Some people have to find it. Some people have it already. I had to find it. I had to have a lifetime of failure to find it. So, and now, with my law enforcement background, it's very easy for me to find determination. Whereas others on the sniper course or something that haven't had to use lethal force on a person, they I missed that one. Well, that's not acceptable, right? You can't miss in that line of work.
Yeah, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
So easy for me to find determination, but some people that don't have that much life experience, where are they going to find it? So, I have ways that I teach coaches to get people to find determination, but that's where it all starts. It all starts with determination, motivation, whatever you want to call it. Then and only then can you step into the program.
I guess people who aren't that kind of motivated, or that they've not reached that kind of turning point or whatever, they don't seek out this information. They say, they buy another bow, essentially,
right.
Or they change their release aid, or
Yep.
They buy something else, and they have a little bit of a novelty factor for a while, and then they're back where they were. And if they're the kind of personality that then they don't want to take that step forward, they're happy, then that's entirely fine. But you don't like to see people kind of repeating the same error over and over again, and kind of stuck in the madness of, I'm just going to keep repeating the same thing and hoping the outcome's going to be different.
I was in the same boat. I bought different bows. I bought different releases. I tried different stuff. I read everything I could on Target Panic. I watched every video on Target Panic, but none of it got to the core problem. Your mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. Only when you understand that can you really dive into the right path of research, and that will bring you to all the same conclusions that I've come to. And it's just extremely interesting to ask people the right question, because most people will step up to Grayson Partlow and they'll say, oh, what kind of bow is he shooting? What arrows is he shooting? What tabs is he shooting? How does he stand? All these physical attributes. But nobody ever asks him, what are you thinking about at full draw? And most of the pros have never been asked that either. And it's extremely interesting to find out that they're thinking the same thing as most other people are. And they just are a bit more determined, or they throw a bit more weight on their stabilizer to get the pin. But I'm telling you, the pros in the compound world are freaked out by pin movement. It is amazing.
Right.
And getting them to let go of it, it has been a difficult task, but I'm getting there. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a complete change in mindset.
It is.
Like you say, I mean, I was discussing this tonight online with somebody who shall remain nameless. But the people are free to do whatever they want. This is just my opinion. I'm nobody. I've not won anything. I'm just a guy who runs a podcast at the minute. But my own feeling on it is that, there's, like you say, if they met Grayson Partlow on the line, or John Demmer, or John Dillinger, or John Winker, or Rick Stonebreaker, they would say, "Oh yeah, exactly what you said. What arrows are you using?
Right.
What's the point weight? What's your FOC? What's the draw force curve on your limbs?
Yeah.
And like you were saying, I'm thinking they're the wrong questions,
right?
Because that's just gear. If you gave, we had a guy here, we didn't have a guy. We have a guy here who's a top kind of target shooter. So he's shooting. He used to shoot field. I think he's having a bit of a sabbatical from that. But he was in World Championships, European Championships, feet to field. So, high enough level shooter. And he was just kind of a bit sick of the kind of almost, at a point, almost relentless kind of promotion of risers and limbs on Facebook groups and that kind of thing. And he wanted to do an experiment where he took all of the fancy gear, put it in a cupboard, and then he went and bought a bow that the whole thing, string, limbs, riser, button, rest, cost him like $150, and then shot that. And he was like, it's not the bow that's scoring the points, it's me, it's the archer, it's what I do. I thought that was very interesting, but again, it emphasizes that, like you're saying, that sometimes people aren't asking the right questions and they're not investing in themselves. They're investing in gear to solve what is a mental problem.
Sure. I watched it happen at Vegas. I watched a pro in the shoot-off in the big show switch releases from a thumb button to a hinge.
Right.
Because he didn't trust himself enough to buckle down and say, okay, I'm going to keep this thing moving no matter what. He switched and tried to mechanically fix a mental problem. And, we see that all the time. It's funny because, I shoot with my thumb, right? And everybody's like, why would you shoot with your thumb, all these things? Well, I really like it. I don't hit my face ever. I've got 2.5 inches more draw length. People are like, well, why would you go to Vegas shooting with your thumb and shooting off the shelf? Why would you ever do that? Because I like shooting that way, right? I go there and I'm testing systems. I'm probably not going to beat the Johns, right? But I'm going to go in there and I'm going to shoot every shot controlled no matter what, because I can't practice that level of stress anywhere other than that little yellow line on the ground there.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm testing different tensions on sears and all this stuff, and what systems really work in extreme stress and what systems are more difficult to get through. But I'm going to get through it no matter what. I'm never going to shoot an arrow where I don't get through my mechanoreceptive trigger. So, I have utmost respect for those top barebow shooters. They are just so determined and they're such good shooters, but, can they teach how they do what they do? And would you want other people to do what they do? One of the top guys collapses 1.5 inches before he lets the arrow go, but it goes in the X.
Yeah.
Right? People are bobbling their heads, they're blinking their eyes, they're doing all kinds of stuff, and they're still shooting them in the X. They've got a very strong mental program, even though some of the physical attributes aren't what you would consider to be perfect. I can't even get in alignment, right? People ask me why I shoot my thumb. With my thumb, I can get in alignment. With my fingers, with the way that my arms are bent and everything, the way I was born, I'm not even close to being in alignment.
Yeah.
And it affects my finger shooting, which is, it's not bad shooting, but it's not as good as it could be if I was in good alignment, where, I wouldn't have to deal with, collapsing or whatever, having to hold full weight and all those things. So it's just, people just need to get a stronger mental program and realize how they're doing what they're doing. And the world will be a better place for it, for sure.
I do want to talk about Vegas, and I'm kind of glad you kind of segued onto Vegas. Yeah. But just going back to that alignment thing, in terms of inducing target panic, you're kind of saying, well, target panic's there. It's a brain issue. There are various psychological reasons that you have target panic. But can things, are there things that can make things worse? And I'm kind of thinking along the lines of being overbowed, having terrible alignment, things that kind of put you under pressure, so that having a collapse is almost kind of programmed in by the equipment that you're using, or by the way that you hold and kind of brace the bow. Would that bring target panic on? And then once you kind of have those few bad shots where your mind thinks, this isn't going great, then being overbowed, having poor posture, poor alignment, does that kind of exacerbate that? When you have, all you're doing with poor form is you're opening the door for bigger pre-ignition movements. Yeah, okay, yeah.
If you're not in alignment, your mind can collapse you much worse than if you were in the proper alignment, right? In that good holding position that everybody teaches, right? That's a real thing. I mean, when you do that, when you're able to cam over and lock into position, you have significantly reduced the range of motion for your pre-ignition movements. So let's say if you're overbowed and not in alignment, your subconscious loves you for it, right? And because it can collapse you much easier, and it wants to bring everything to center. And when somebody said, "Oh God, that last shot, that was horrible," that is conscious mind thinking that, what am I going to do with myself? The last shot was horrible, but the subconscious was like, "Whew, man, I braced the heck out of us for that one. That was awesome." Right?
Yeah.
To complete, remember, the subconscious doesn't even want you to shoot a bow. It doesn't want to have this sudden release of energy. It doesn't want to put you in this stressful situation. Its job is to keep you alive. That's why it brings everything to center and collapses you and plucks a string and does all these things, right? They can all be traced back to their pre-ignition movements. So, and certain people are born with different levels of pre-ignition movements. I mean, John Deber has pre-ignition movements in his shot, but they're so minimal, they hardly carry him out of the 10 ring.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And that's awesome. But I've also, seen people shoot trees from pre-ignition movement collapses because maybe their mind was somewhere else. As soon as the mind goes away from the shot activation movement, the conscious override doesn't happen, and the subconscious is going to link some type of pre-ignition movement. Sometimes it's a collapse, sometimes it's grabbing the bow. It's all kinds of bad stuff can happen. So that's why, the good shooters are good decision makers. They're good at putting their mind where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And those are the two skills.
I've seen a guy with a compound shoot an arrow 11 foot up in a tree, completely miss the target.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kind of thinking, how on earth could you do that with a compound? Mm-hmm. I didn't think you could miss with a compound.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but when you're holding so much less weight with a compound, right? Your mind somewhat relaxes on that a bit, right? But if you've got a compound that you have to stay active with, meaning it doesn't have any valley in the cams, then, if you're thinking about your aim, it's it's doing all kinds of fun stuff to you, punching the trigger and collapsing and grabbing the bow all at the same time. It just invites all these other motor programs to come in so that it can keep you alive and keep you braced for that recoil.
Just a reminder, this is a 2-part interview with Joel Turner. Part 2 will be coming up very soon. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please remember to download and subscribe. And thanks once again from all of us here at the Barebow Archery Podcast. Until next time, see you later.
Hit the X with the Barebow Archery Podcast.
Produced and presented by Glenn Pringle for Redstone Productions Limited.